Alright, we're going to go over a tutorial on just kind of a refresher on how to set up the NoxBox here. So obviously this would be a setup that we would be taking on whether it's ground, flight, whatever it may be. Obviously this module here would be connected to our pole here, but obviously we have a regular full O2 cylinder here as well as a nitric bottle. Preferably we'd like the nitric to be probably above 1,000. If you're looking at a relatively long distance transport, you might want it to be a little higher than that. We usually don't use tons of it, but just in case you get to the bedside and they don't have nitric ready or things like that, best to kind of have more than we would need than be scrambling to see if we can find another bottle here. Of note, you'll also be taking, there's a plastic bag upstairs that has 2 sets of vent tubing, the dual limb tubing in it, as well as a BVM. It's just a regular BVM, but it's just there to quickly grab in case you were to need it. And then obviously there's 2 sets of the vent tubing just in case the dual limb has a hole in it or something goes wrong with some of the pieces in there. And then there's obviously also the flow tubing and your flow sensor that goes into the side of the ventilator. So obviously we'll start here. First thing we're going to do is turn on here, big green button in the back. It's now going to go through its self checks. It's going to do everything itself there. So while that's setting itself up here, I can show you here. This is obviously our small little jump bag that we have here. There would usually be a seal here and a seal coming on these two, but I've already taken them off. In our main pocket here, we have 2 sets of injector bag tubing. This way, just in case one of them was missing something, piece went wrong, you have kind of some backup stuff here. In these bags, it has a full injector module set up, a monitoring line with the T-piece, and then also the small little filter that goes on the NoxBox itself. We also have in here our backup wheel here if you do need to use your flow sensor. Red side is for when you're using the ventilator, and this green circle here is going to be your minute ventilation, what the patient's currently pulling. Our other side here is the blue side, and this green circle is going to be what you are setting your BVM to. Most people obviously set it to around 15, so you just set it to whatever you need there, and then you can base off of your concentration off of your dial on here. So when we look back over here in our back pocket, we also just have some guidance cards here as far as which pieces go where, how it sets up on the ventilator, and just different pieces like that just for your own reference. And then we also keep a set of trauma shears in each one as well. This is for cutting your dual limb tubing after you've done your pre-op checks so that you can put your injector module and sampling line into the vent tubing. There's also your piece here. This is your just for your setup of the NoxBox. This piece here just goes behind your injector module to push some O2 so your nitric's going through. This piece is reusable, so we can keep it in this bag and it just slides back in the pocket here. And then up in our front pocket here, a couple of backup supplies, 2 filters here. This goes on the side of the NoxBox, and this is only used for when you are using an aerogen or some kind of nebulizer setup just to protect the machine itself. We have our backup line here, and this one here is used for when we, if you did need to bag the patient or the module itself failed and you needed to kind of put the nitric in line for the ventilator, going through our flow meter here as opposed to the set module itself. And last but not least, we have a Allen key set up here. This is just in case there was an emergency. We obviously have had some problems in the past. We have our bracket here, so these pieces can be taken off and it can be rotated. We do have this one here, and then there's also one down in the respiratory closet on B2 where we can get one where the bracket's already been changed. But we have had some incidents in the past where it's had to stay connected to the patient. We had to be moving it, so that is kind of there as a last resort just in case you did need it there. For purposes of this test, we'll obviously be using this stuff so we don't have to break up all of our bags here. So as I mentioned here, we have our small little filter here, which is going to go on the NoxBox. This is going to be our monitoring line with a T-piece. From the manufacturer, the T-piece and this little piece here come separately, but we make sure we have it already set up where it's clipped in, so you'll always see it coming like this out of our packaging. Our injector module, our O2 tubing for our check, and then there's a 1 meter piece of tubing here that we use for the nitric check as well. Has to be this this length and exact piece of tubing so that it gets an accurate count here, and then just a BVM for our test. So going back to our kind of system tests and things here, we've obviously gone through its self-test already, it's past that, and then this kind of brings you to your main home screen when you turn it on. There's obviously a list of the most recent calibrations that have been done on it. We have had some issues in the past where people have turned it on and it shows that the high calibration needs to be done. So this can be verified here. So we can obviously see here the last time it was done was the 5th of July with a due date of the 4th of August coming up there. If that is something that needs to be calibrated, that has to be done by respiratory. So that's something that you'd have to put this piece of equipment out of service, let obviously SOC and clinical lead know, and use the backup machine. Once you start to feel comfortable with this machine, if you understand all the connections and the hookups, you can just skip to the system test and you're ready to roll. It'll just check the machine. But if you're a little less comfortable or you're kind of using it for the first couple of times, we're going to go through the step-by-step guide, which is going to show you exactly where things hook up, what needs to be done, and exactly in what order. So we'll start here by clicking on step-by-step guide. Obviously, we have the small little turn wheel here, two different options. We have the intelligent delivery here, and that's going to base everything off of what's on our screen here. It's going to give you your monitoring. It's going to let you set your dose, different things like that. If we turn to the side here, that's going to go to our backup NO mixer. So for this one, if this gets dropped on the ground and the screen shatters, if for some reason there's a critical failure of some kind and we need to bag the patient, we hook up here and then we would turn this here, and we're going to base everything off of that wheel we were speaking about earlier. So we obviously have confirmed here, obviously, that we're going to our intelligent delivery. Next up, this is obviously built for more of the in-house side of things, so it just wants you to check your supply cylinders as well as making sure the wheels are locked, but that's not necessarily, doesn't apply to us quite as much. It does give you two options here, either one cylinder or two. For our purposes, we're always only going to be using one cylinder, so we're going to press there. Next up, we're going to be checking the concentration of our bottle here. So on the side here, we can just see that it says 800 parts per million. That is the only available one from this company, so it should always be that 800 parts per million. So we'll go to our next page here. Next, we're going to inspect the regulator. We're always going to have our regulator already attached to it, but obviously just make sure your connections are tight, make sure everything's good there. Obviously, it's already attached there. Next, we're going to make sure that we're connected in the back here. So we obviously have our piece coming off of the tank here, which is going to be our small right angle here, coming into the back of our NoxBox here. And we're always going to be connected to number 1 here. If we did have 2 cylinders, we could go to 1 and 2, and then we just have our purge port at the bottom here, and I'll show you what that's used for as we move forward. So we already have our supply line connected here. Now we're going to go ahead and open our cylinder valve here, and we're going to be looking at our opening PSI here. So obviously we're looking at the red line here. That's going to be our PSI. The other one is our bar measurement, so we don't necessarily care about that. It's PSI that we would be paying attention to. So obviously we're good there. Our needle is not in the red zone, so we can go to our next page here. Now it's going to detect the pressure. We're going to leave our tank open, and basically it's just checking here to make sure that there is no leaks. So we've moved on to our next test here. Now we're going to go ahead and close that valve. And we're going to watch the needle for about 30 seconds, making sure that there's no visible leak or anything as far as that's concerned. Now that our 30 seconds have passed, we can see that the needle didn't move. We can go ahead and hit the check button. Now we're going to start hooking up some of our equipment here. So we have our NOx flow sensor here, which is obviously our piece that has our injector module in here. We are going to uncoil there, and it's going to walk us through exactly where our connections are. So our first one here is going to be this piece here. We always want the green facing up. There's also a small notch here which lines up with the piece there. And then this next one here is what we're going to be screwing onto the one just beneath it. So we're going to push in. We'll hear a slight little click. And then this one simply just screws in just there. Now that we've completed that, we can go to our next screen. Obviously we've already clicked in and done everything there. And then we have our small little filter here. There's obviously 2 different ends to it, so it'll only go in there one way. We have a piece here that's got the black piece there, just pushes right in, and then our other piece just screws on the back, just like that. Next we have our sampling line. This is obviously going to be reading exactly what the patient's receiving, making sure that there's not too much or too little going to the patient, and that just screws with the wings onto our bottom portion here. Obviously, as I mentioned before, we already have our T-piece already set up, but if you hadn't already, this piece just screws on there. Now we're going to assemble the system line test. So this is the setup for the test that we're going to be doing here. So you have your Nox flow sensor here, which has the green arrow on it here. So we want the nitric to be obviously pushed through this tubing to our monitoring line. So we're going to go just on there like such. Then our monitoring line on this end here. And then, as I mentioned before, we just have this piece here that goes on the back of here, and this is just going to push some oxygen through, helping carry the nitric through our tank here. And we're going to click there. And next it's asking us to open the valve on our nitric tank, as well as hooking up to our oxygen bottle here. For when you're at the sending facility, you obviously have your tank here. You do have to set it to 10 liters, so if it takes you a little while to do the system test, you could go through your oxygen a little bit. So if you do have access to one of their cylinders, it might behoove you to make sure that you use that there. In a perfect world, we wouldn't need to use this one, but just it's there in case we did need to bag or anything like that. So obviously, we have this piece here. We'll just go on our cylinder here. We're going to set that to 10 liters. And we're going to open our tank here. And now we're going to do here, and it's going to go through a test here. Can take up about to 5 minutes here. Obviously, it's going to, you'll see a little bit on your NO here. It can go above the 10 and it'll hover over for a little bit, but then it'll kind of work its way out, and it'll obviously let you know with a green check on all three if it does pass or fail. So while we're doing that, we can take a look at our ventilator tubing here. Perfect. So we'll come just over here. And so obviously when we take it out of our bag, it's going to be just a single dual lumen tubing that's going to have obviously your one lumen here and one here like such. So we're going to complete our regular pre-op check on the ventilator without incident. We're just going to put that there. We have our flow sensor tubing here is going to go on here, hook it up to our ventilator like we normally would with a dual lumen setup. Do your pre-op checks, make sure everything's good there before you cut the tubing and get it ready for putting our nitric in line. So once we've done our pre-op check, everything looks good. We think we're pretty much ready to start transitioning the patient over. We are going to have this piece here, and we're going to come down from your piece here about one length of tubing here, and we're going to cut it here, and that's where our monitoring piece is going to go in, our small little green T-piece, which I'll show you how to hook up in a minute. And then you're going to follow down even further here, and from the end we're going to cut one length as well, and that's where our injector module is going to go. When we do put that in line, we obviously want to make sure that our arrow is facing the right way, and then we don't want any filters past the injector module itself. It's fine to obviously have your filters on the ventilator themselves. So once we get this completed here with our test, I'll show you the full setup on the ventilator. So as I mentioned previously, we obviously just have our regular setup here. So just your dual limbs going in there. Obviously you want to make sure that you have your inhalation is going to be your one that you obviously want to be cut on. So we just like this, just like this. And then when we are ready, we're going to place our green little piece just here. That's going to go at the top closest to the patient here. And then as I mentioned, our injector module is going to go down towards the bottom here, going just in here like this. So as we can see on the NoxBox here, our system tests were successful. There's nothing further we need to do right now. So we can click next on the screen here. Now it's going to let us know that it is ready for us to start connecting the patient to it. We can turn off that oxygen there. And now as you can see, it's going to connect it to the ventilator here. So we can remove our test tubing here. Remove that piece there. Remove that. This piece also can be saved, going into our piece there for our next patient setup. But obviously we have our monitoring line here, which is going to connect just on there and just on there. And then the injector module itself, with the arrow making sure it's facing away from the ventilator, we're going to come just on here like this and in there like that. And that is ready as far as full setup. Now you can essentially hook the patient up to it right away. Okay, so we're going to go on to our next page here. Now the system's ready for us to set. We can place a dose in. If you were completely ready just to hook it up to the patient and get going, you could set your dose there. But for purposes here, I'll just show you how you would kind of put it in a standby mode while you're finishing getting the patient set up and not switching them over to the ventilator quite yet. So we're going to set our original NO dose to 0. Good there. We're going to confirm that dose is 0. And now it would allow you to select your alarms here. Obviously, our alarms don't matter at this point because we're not set on any dose. Every time that you change the dose, it will prompt you to confirm your alarms and make sure everything looks good there. So now it's obviously going to make us confirm that we do want to have no dose set. It's going to make a couple of little noises there. And so obviously, as we can see here on our main screen, we have our NO dose is currently set at 0. The patient's not receiving anything, so there's no nitric dioxide being sensed. And then this is the current FiO2 that it's seeing going through here. Obviously, if you have the patient on 100%, it would be reading 100% if you were had the patient going through at this point. In order, if we want to change our NO dose, we just click on this small little pencil here, and it would prompt us, say we wanted to put them on 20. Prompt us here. Going to confirm. As I mentioned, it'll make you confirm your alarms here. You can change your alarms if necessary, but we usually recommend using the manufacturer ones. That way, it will notify you if it sees anything 5 above, 5 below. I will let you know that when you do initially put it on the patient, it does take a minute or two to kind of realize exactly the flow of the ventilator and how much nitric it needs to give. So you might see kind of some wild swings in how much the patient's receiving at first, but it will plateau out after a couple of minutes or so. Moving on to our next page here. Now it's going to prompt us to accept to deliver the new dose. Going to click our check there. So now we are giving the patient the nitric. It's going to alarm us in a minute because we don't have anything going through the ventilator, but obviously that is how we would go about it for their dose there. So let's go ahead back here and we'll set our dose back to 0. So now you have that fully set there. It looks like you'd be fine. You can just leave it sitting there, but after about 2 minutes or so, it's gonna realize there's no vent flow coming through, even though the patient is not currently hooked up to it. So in order to get around that, so that you can just have it turned on, waiting for your patient to hook up to it, what we're gonna do here is we're gonna close our NO cylinder. Once that's fully closed, we're gonna disconnect our tubing here, and we're gonna purge the line on our bottom one. Once that's purged, we're going to place this back on number 1 here. Now it's not going to expect there to be any nitric or vent flow coming through it, so it'll sit in standby for as long as you need to prior to hooking it up to the patient there. And I think that just about covers most of our stuff as far as the normal use of the NoxBox. If there was an emergency of any kind, obviously, as I mentioned, we'd have to go onto our backup mixer here. So what we do here, as I mentioned, is we have our tubing in the front of our thing here that we're going to use. And this piece here comes preset, and we have kind of a regular oxygen tubing end on one end and then our lure lock on the other end. And this would be in the case that, not when we're bagging the patient, but if our ventilator is working perfectly fine and it's just that this module has failed, but we can still use the ventilator. What we're going to do here is we're going to switch it into our backup delivery mode. It's going to notify us that we're now in our manual override, so it's no longer using the intelligent delivery. We can click the X out of that, and then this is going to go on here, just like a regular flow meter. And we're actually going to be this is our nitric delivery line here, the one with the white screw. This piece is going to come out of here and screw onto here like such. And then this is where we would need our wheel on that red side. And so, for instance, if we were looking at a minute ventilation of 10 here, and the patient, we were looking for them to receive around 20 parts per million, we would be following and putting our thing right here on about the 300. So we're going to say right here, we're going to line up with around 300. Obviously, we're going to be slightly over. We'll probably be closer to about 23 parts per million, but within reason, you could go a smidge lower if you wanted to. But on the safer side, it's better to set it a little bit over to make sure they're getting enough nitric. So at this point, we do not need to turn on our flow meter. Right now, it's just naturally just feeding it through, going into our vent tubing, and that's going to push it through. Now, say we had an issue here and our patient went into arrest, or we had an issue, the ventilator completely crapped out on us. At this point, we would just use our regular BVM, and we're going to basically remove everything from the patient at this time, including the ventilator. This is going to go just here. We're going to set our flow meter to whatever we would normally set it at. As I mentioned earlier, usually people set it for around 15. So if we're looking for that 20 parts per million, we're going to set it at our 400 here. So we're going to set to 400 here, and this is where we would turn our flow meter to 15, and our oxygen is going to be coming from the back here, connected to our bottle, and we could just bag the patient as normal, and your nitric and obviously oxygen is all going to be coming through your BVM. Obviously, as recommended with our last one that we used to use, the iNO Max, you always want to keep on continually bagging the patient. If we leave it latent for too long, we can have a buildup of nitric dioxide, which we don't want to do. So we're just going to be continually bagging the patient until we can get to the closest facility, or we figure out what was wrong with our ventilator. I think that covers the majority of our NoxBox. If obviously there's any questions, you can reach out to myself or Chad, and we should be able to answer them.